Hi, welcome back to my sound booth. It's probably not obvious, but I would have probably saved thousands of dollars if I had hired a professional to do this work. But I don't think I would have learned anything. And as much as sharing the story and forcing myself to be accountable to my own voice and my own work, this is about me finding my voice and hopefully inspiring you to find your own creative voice, whether it's with audiobook narration or voiceover or D&D or photography or cooking or whatever else you're doing. Our voices matter. And this is my way of forcing myself to move forward. I have spent money on microphones and software and amplifiers and channel strips and video cameras and sound blankets. And, I could list 1,000 other things that I've learned. And ultimately, every time you turn around, you are finding little lessons. And I'll try to share some of those along the way. And so by hiring a professional voiceover artist to do this work, I've been on this for a year, so I'm sure that would have already been done a long time ago, all 3 of my books, and I probably could have written a couple others by now, though it takes me about a year to write a book. But the lessons I've learned, I think, will be with me for the rest of my life, and hopefully in everything I do. So welcome to Chapter 3 of my first audiobook narration. And, feel free to jump ahead with chapters and listen to the whole book. Hopefully we'll get through it and you'll have an entire story to listen to. But this is Chapter 3, Super Ninja. Chapter 3. Cool water cascaded over his shoulders as he picked up a small piece of soap buried at his feet. He used it along with handfuls of sand to scour away the sweat and dirt of the day. He rubbed until his skin was polished and tingled raw and fresh under the gentle ocean breeze, a different clean than washing in the brine of the ocean. He was oblivious to any who might pass, but there were laws against public nudity, and so he still wore the threadbare jeans as he bathed. His hair was a problem, thick and tangled and long in the style of the 70s. He did his best to comb through it with rough, thick fingers, taking it on as a challenge until the tangles became curls, shaking his head and watching drops of water fall through the sunlight like a spray of diamonds. And then he started again. He was nervous. It had been a long time since he'd thought about his appearance, but he didn't want to scare her away. He ran his hands over his face. She wouldn't remember him with a beard. A week of whiskers in those days barely made a shadow. He rubbed the last of the soap across his face, going for lather, but knew he'd settle for a bit of gritty foam. That she wanted to see him at all made it worth the effort. Angel and his 2 friends were still high from the adrenaline of wilding on the old man, and Miguel had scored beer to go along with some pot, old enough to be shipped off to war, but not actually old enough to legally buy beer. The fact that he was with Angel, whom everyone on the beach knew only too well, was enough to open doors to the refrigerated coolers and put a tall boy into each of their hands. It was a tricky thing, navigating the whims of the younger while honoring the directives of the elder. Of course, if anything happened as a result of selling the boy alcohol, there would be hell to pay. Visits from normally blind cops or corrupt city officials, and the fines they stole, would be the least of it. But if the boy cried mistreatment because of who he was, they could just as easily be dealing with broken arms and legs. Or worse. Man, this shit is disgusting. disgusting, talking loud enough to make sure they were heard, testing the waters as they eyed the army jacket draped across the low concrete wall. Vagos on that fucking beach, man. Shit getting worse todo dia. They watched the man scrape his face clean with a knife. The blade must have been keen as a razor. It slid across his face without effort. He seemed consumed with his task and oblivious to the boys, sleeping on the beach like fucking dogs. Repugnante. Where the fuck they shit, man? He ran his hands across his face, as smooth as it was gonna get, slid past his chin and throat, and fingered the thin chain around his neck. He traced the 2 stamped metal tags, reissued while he sat for mandatory debriefing and months-long treatment, recovering in an army hospital, besides the scars on his back and what was left of a 4-inch flag tattoo on one shoulder, the only physical reminders of who he had been. The boys watched as he rinsed the knife clean, flicked it closed, the butterfly handle as dazzling in the sun as the spraying water. He tossed it without looking to land neatly on his jacket. Felipe jerked his hand away from the jacket, looked at the man under the shower. No change. Maybe didn't even know they were there. Fuck it. He let out the breath held in his throat and waited till his heart started up again. He snaked his hand back into the coat pocket, closing on the few dollars stashed inside, turned back with a grin. Get the knife. Angel mouthed the words. Felipe swallowed hard as his hand inched toward the knife. Leave it. The man rinsed the soap from his eyes, shook his head and let water fly like a wet dog, glared at the boys. Miguel pushed past Felipe and scooped up the knife. Bullshit, cabron. Show us some of me, man. Maybe he was still feeling strong from vanquishing his imaginary foes in the alley. He slashed the air, adding his own sound effects in case the gringo had trouble picturing it all. Bent his knees baseball style, ready to take on all comers. The man looked at him. Maybe 17, 18, 19 at the most. No older than many of those he'd served with. And like them, face filled with unearned bravado, naivete that came from being unable to imagine a world not of their making, eyes bright with liquor, slashing the knife through the air as if he could cut it, for some reason making swishing and slashing sounds with his mouth. A kid, and stupid. No. That's what I thinky, man. I swear my God. Fucking cut, USA. He was moving toward the army jacket when Angel kicked it into the water. The second punk swelled his skinny chest and pulled out a cheap switchblade, played Errol Flynn, his hand moving in an impressive blur and killing the air 6 times. The man sighed, picked up the wet jacket, his eyes falling to the name stenciled above the pocket. Flashed on who he had been, an instant of time travel that took him from being a star athlete in the Midwest, with all the accolades and dreams they brought to a handsome young man, to the grueling weeks of training for being ill-prepared to storm faraway shores, to find joy and purpose as a star rose again on the muddy fields and in the dark jungles of battle, to a hell as real and terrifying as any imagined, in his attempts at clawing his way back again. He snapped the wet jacket forward to wrap around Felipe's ankle. He jerked hard, and the surprised boy fell on his ass onto the wet cement. As graceful as any matador, the man sidestepped as Miguel lunged. Miguel slid into Angel, and they both went down. Up in a flash, Miguel slashed backward, the tip of the blade fractions of an inch from the man's face. Seemingly in slow motion, the man spun with the boy's next lunge, ending up behind him. Miguel like a bull who only found cape, twisted in place, lowered his stance, and charged, slashing wildly. The man stepped forward into the attack, blending with emotion. Embrace tiger. His hand slid gently to the boy's wrist, then crushed the bones beneath an iron grip as he followed the boy's motion to its logical conclusion. Return to mountain. His shoulders slammed into the boy, and he stripped the knife. Felipe tossed his friends the old man's cheap switchblade, and Miguel caught it one-handed, slashed back with a roar, and found only air. He lunged again, stabbing forward prison block style, the knife point threading the air like a sewing machine. Okay, enough. Using the wet jacket to block, the man let the knife tangle in it, then kicked the boy's legs out from under him. He dropped nearly as fast as his attacker, letting his weight fall across the boy's outstretched arm. Miguel screamed when the bone snapped, and the man caught the switchblade when it flew into the air. Desperate, Felipe darted forward with a man's own knife. The man blended with the attack, stripped the gleaming balisong with one hand, then stabbed down and backward with a cheap switchblade as the boy stumbled past. Felipe had no time to process what happened as he crashed face first to the wet cement, eyes blurry from the impact, breath exploding from his skinny chest. He tried to stand as the pain caught up, his leg crumpling beneath him. He twisted and fell, screaming to find 5 inches of steel buried in the side of his ass. The man slowly turned toward Angel, the smallest and youngest, and maybe the most dangerous. Angel's eyes locked on the man's, a moment that stretched out in his mind, the keening of his companion's pain fading, the warmth of the Miami sun going cold. Angel swallowed hard and backed away. The man flipped the butterfly knife closed and slipped it into his pocket, scooped up his coat. He did his best to ignore the gathering crowd, close enough to see, but far enough away to feel safe. A couple tourists snapping pictures with their Kodaks and Nikons, 2 lifeguards with whistles and red surf shorts heading from the beach, a girl shoving coins into a Miami Bell beach payphone. Police would come. Or not. Just the same, it was time to go. As the cries and moans from the boys faded, Nash, Stephen J., 266-00-9677, AB Neg, Catholic, Captain, Ranger, no longer a captain in any man's army, fingered the metal tags hanging at his throat, and walked away. Okay, chapter 3. And, I was lucky enough to work in the film industry as both an actor and a stuntman, and also do choreography for a few films. And trying to put it on paper in such a way that people can understand it and follow it and still experience the excitement of it is, something I'm proud of. In my other novel, there's a single line that a friend of mine told me one time, and it always stuck with me, that he has a talent for violence, and hopefully that comes across in these stories. So on to chapter 4, and the plot thickens, as they say. Feel free to follow along with the story. You can use the chapter marks and skip my preamble and my commentary and just enjoy the story. Or, you can follow along to kind of help discover some of the lessons, as I do, that we can use to express ourselves and to do our own projects, and hopefully to find our own voices in everything we do. And so, thanks for coming in, thanks for listening, and on to chapter 4.